A warm welcome to the world today. I'm Joke Rogers. Coming up on the program, President Donald Trump insists the U.S. will take control of the Gaza Strip after his meeting with Jordanian King Abdullah. While Jordan and Egypt are working on what they call a comprehensive plan for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, plus Elon Musk denies a hostile takeover of U.S. government in surprise appearance at the White House. The World Today begins right now. Welcome again to the program. We begin with the U.S. President Donald Trump's insistence on taking control of the Gaza Strip following his meeting with the Jordanian King Abdullah on Tuesday. It was their first ever meeting over the war in the region, even though King Abdullah himself has insisted he will not be arm-twisted into accepting Mr. Trump's demands. Mr. Trump recently suggested he could withhold aid to Jordan and Egypt unless they agreed to take in Gazans. And speaking to reporters in the Oval Office, the Jordanian king said Mr. Trump insisted he would not back down from his stance on Gaza, saying the place is a demolition site. And same with the issue, Egypt says it's working on a comprehensive vision for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, which guarantees Palestinians the right to stay on their land, unlike the proposal put forward by President Donald Trump. According to the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, it says it hopes to cooperate with the Trump administration to reach a just settlement for the Palestinian cause. The UN has warned that any forced displacement of Gaza's population would be illegal under international law and would be tantamount to ethnic cleansing. This comes amid growing concern that the fighting in Gaza could resume after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Hamas it would end the ceasefire if the Palestinian armed group does not return hostages by Saturday. Mr. Netanyahu issued the ultimatum after Hamas said it was postponing freeing more hostages until further notice, claiming Israel had violated the terms of the ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, on his part, has urged Israel and Hamas to ensure the ceasefire deal continues to hold. In a statement on the issue read aloud by UN spokesperson Rolando Gomez, Mr. Guterres said he was appealing to Hamas to proceed with the planned liberation of the hostages on Saturday, and that both sides must fully abide by their commitments on the ceasefire agreement and resume serious negotiations in Doha for the second phase. Mr. Guterres is also prioritizing getting aid into Gaza, which continues to be an enormous need, reiterating that hostilities in Gaza must be avoided at all costs. Meanwhile, back inside the United Nations Security Council, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres insisted a return to war in Gaza must be avoided at all costs. But the UN Aid Coordination Office highlighted that a significant aid boost into Gaza has only been possible under the conditions generated by the ceasefire deal that began on January 19.
Under the conditions generated by this deal, the United Nations has been able to scale up humanitarian operations significantly, bringing in food, medical, and shelter supplies, among others, which have enabled us to provide a range of critical services to people in need across Gaza and initiate repairs as well. The full visibility of the pipeline and the ceasefire deal and the compliance indicators should be available to the guarantors of the ceasefire deal, which does not include the United Nations, but Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S.
That prompts me to remind you of a statement that we shared with you a short while ago on behalf of the Secretary General on the situation in Gaza, through which he says, quote, "We must avoid at all costs the resumption of hostilities in Gaza that would lead to an immense tragedy." I appeal to Hamas to proceed with the planned liberation of hostages next Saturday, and both sides must fully abide by their commitments in the ceasefire agreement and resume serious negotiations in Doha for the second phase, end quote.
Let's get right into the Gaza city now, where the United Nations Population Fund's representative to Palestine met women in the Asahaba Hospital, a UNFPA Women and Girls, Safe Space, and with youth volunteers in central Gaza. The ceasefire has been a major relief for the people in Gaza, more than half of whom have lost or been forced from their homes and struggling to survive the winter in flimsy tents. UNFPA staff have been on the ground trying to get a sense of the challenges, but the greatest fear, according to the agency, is that the fragile ceasefire might collapse, thrusting them back into insecurity, displacement, and bombardment.
I'm here in Gaza, and everywhere you look, there is a stark landscape of devastation and unbearable living conditions. Most houses have been demolished, reduced to rubble and debris. People are living outside of their previous homes. In my interaction with women and girls in one of UNFPA-supported women's spaces, they narrated to me harrowing experiences. Most of them had lost breadwinners, they had lost their husbands, but they were willing to carry on if only support could come from all of us, from the international community. The women narrated to me a list of demands, of requirements for them to be able to stand on their own. But most importantly, they are worried. They are worried that the current cessation of hostilities may not last. And they are calling on us, the UN system, the international community, to do all that we can to make sure that peace prevails.
Let's bring in international affairs analyst Stephen Hayes, who joins us from Washington in the United States. Stephen, great to see you again today.
Thank you. It's good to see you too.
Right. So the days leading up to Saturday would perhaps be the most uneasy as more uncertainty clouds the sanctity of the ceasefire agreement. Why do you think, neither Israel nor Hamas is willing to budge on their demands?
Well, Israel, I think, was willing to stay to the schedule, and I think President Trump has changed the whole game by insisting that all hostages be released Saturday. Hamas, on the other hand, feels that they had an agreement, but they also understand that if they release the hostages now, then they have no bargaining power, and the war will probably continue. So both of them are locked into what seems to be almost an intractable position right now.
And then you have the President Donald Trump, who stands on the sidelines. You mentioned that he brought in a game changer, very recently, insisting on an American takeover of Gaza. I wonder what analysts like yourself think how this could affect the region.
Well, I think if you want a personal view, I think that's probably a little bit crazy, but I think, professionally, it's a no-go in many ways. What would happen if the U.S. were to take it over? It would just target U.S. soldiers, for instance, and it may be very popular unpopular, I should say, at home. It's not a popular position with Congress, although Congress falls lockstep into, at least the Republican Party, which is the majority, falls lockstep into whatever Trump says. So I think it's going to be a potential large mess. On the other hand, the popular opinion here in the United States, I think, would be against it. But it's shifting as well, because I think everyone's tired of it and said, well, maybe this will work. I don't see this working. I don't think it's practical. It's not supported by anybody in the region, with the exception of Israel. And even Israel hasn't gone fully out on the line on this one.
Right. Does America need control of an external territory, especially one in the Middle East? What would that mean for the country?
Well, I think it would make us a strongly imperialistic country. We've stayed away from that, other than our own history, but it would mean a great deal in terms of how the United States is perceived around the world. Changes things, I think, more negatively. I understand how somebody like President Trump could see that it's a great real estate bargain, and also it could if the United States controlled it, it could be a military base, and almost probably would be. But that just changes the whole perspective of global cooperation. It's going to change the whole perspective of the United States.
And let's talk a bit about the meeting between President Trump and King Abdullah of Jordan. Both are very opinionated men, both very nationalistic and heady about their position on the issue of the Gaza population and where they live. What would you say was the biggest takeaway from their meeting?
Well, I think that it's the biggest takeaway, I think, is at the end of the meeting, the king seemed to hedge a little bit. But the problem with Jordan has is going back to 1970 and the Black September movement, which was Palestinians trying to take over Jordan at that time. And so that's been it was a very painful and painful lesson that's been remembered very well. So already the Palestinians probably outnumber Jordanian citizens. He just can't afford to have more Palestinians in the country. So there's going to have to be some special deals to make that happen. And I think that's going to be very, very hard.
Right, and probably why he insists he will not be taking in Gazans into his kingdom. So what other options, are open to President Trump in light of this?
It's hard to say what's open to President Trump right now. Almost anything is, because he throws out his ideas, talks about them very openly, without necessarily a lot of consultation or thought before he does it. So I think his options right now will still be supporting Israel. If the hostages aren't released on Saturday, I think he's going to give the green flag to starting flag to Netanyahu, and I think we're going to see not only a return to violence, but a significant increase this time. Most people feel that the hostages can't live much longer. The release of the hostages reminded me of Auschwitz. Quite frankly, I visited Auschwitz many, many years ago, and it stays in your mind forever. These three that were released were almost duplicate copies of the people in Auschwitz that managed to survive. So I think that has really changed the dynamics of thinking in Israel. Obviously, the families are concerned about what's happened if violence is returned, because I think that remaining hostages will definitely then be in extreme danger.
Right, Stephen, you expressed that you said a few minutes ago that the Jordanian king might be, expressing some fears of, history repeating itself, going by the fact that Palestine was trying to take over Jordan years back. But what will be, Jordan's loss in the light of, the latest developments, seeing that President Trump did threaten, Jordan with sanctions if it did not take in Palestinian refugees while, the reconstruction, so to speak, is taking place in Gaza?
Well, I think Jordan is dependent largely, to a large extent, on U.S. aid. There's no doubt about that. Jordan's been one of the largest aid recipients. Would President Trump actually follow through on that threat? I don't know. I think it would be foolish, because that also then moves one of our strongest allies in the Middle East to others. So I think that would be a foolish step. If he does do that, then we've got a further problem of alienation, and makes Jordan far more unstable.
Well, there might not be, the exchange of prisoners of war and the Israeli hostages on Saturday, going by, what we're seeing so far. Where does that leave the war between Israel and Hamas?
I think it means the war starts again. The ceasefire is broken. President Trump, in a way, has put himself in a corner of if it doesn't happen on Saturday at noon, when he specifically said noon, which I assume was U.S. time. If it doesn't happen by noon U.S., then as his point and words were, all hell will break loose. I think it puts him in a corner. He has to follow through. Netanyahu is certainly ready to follow through. So I think if there isn't a release and exchange of prisoners, then I think there's a very high likelihood that we're going to return to a war, and I think it will be no holds barred this time around.
It seemed that everything was going well up to some point. Do you think the intervention or the remarks of the U.S. president was what made things worse?
Yeah, certainly it did. It changed the whole agreement. The agreement was that it was being phases. There's no longer any room for phases. It's release all hostages now or else. So it clearly does change the dynamics, and that is the one thing that has changed. In some corners in Israel, it's welcomed. I suppose in some corners in the U.S., it's welcome that change is, because there's also a fear, given the release of the last three, the three were in shocking condition. There's a question whether many of the survivors that are still there, estimated to be around 30 now, I think, are going to be able to live much longer. So now it becomes almost an act of desperation in some people's minds for rescue.
Right. Stephen, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Always an honor.
Welcome back. Let's check in on the war in Europe. Ukraine's capital city, Kyiv, has been hit by a Russian missile, killing one person and injuring 4 others. The person who died was said to have been a 9-year-old girl. The Ukrainian military said it shot down 6 of the 7 ballistic missiles and 71 drones launched by Russia, which sparked several fires throughout the city. The strikes had caused damage in 5 Kyiv districts. Meanwhile, officials in the city of Kyiv also reported damage to residential buildings and infrastructure after the city was also targeted in Russian strikes on Tuesday night. Meanwhile, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says hostilities in frontline areas in Ukraine killed civilians and many, including children. In the Donetsk region, shelling damaged critical electricity lines, leaving more than 170,000 people without electricity and heating for up to 2 days. Still in the east, in the Kharkiv region, a glide bomb strike disrupted power supply and damaged multiple residential buildings and a health facility. OCHA has facilitated an interagency humanitarian convoy, the 8th this year, to deliver humanitarian assistance to 800 residents of a frontline community in the Kharkiv region, where mostly older people remain amid worsening security conditions. And the UN says former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her government tried to cling to power using systematic deadly violence against protesters that could amount to crimes against humanity. UN human rights investigators accused the deposed government of a brutal response to mass opposition last year, in which they said up to 1,400 people had been killed, mostly by security forces. The UN team said an official policy to attack and violently repress anti-government protesters had been directed by political leaders and senior security officials. Mr. Hasina, who had been in office for 15 years, fled by helicopter to India shortly before crowds stormed her residence last August. The unrest began as students-led protests against quotas in civil service jobs and escalated into a countrywide movement to oust Ms. Hasina and her Aswami League party following a deadly police crackdown. Thousands more were injured in the worst violence Bangladesh has seen in its war of independence in 1971.
So following the student-led protests in Bangladesh between the 1st of July and 15th of August 2024, it was the interim government itself that requested the deployment of a fact-finding mission to Bangladesh. So we, the UN Human Rights Office, sent this mission. From the 16th of September, we deployed a mission that was supported by a forensic physician, weapons expert, gender expert, open source analyst, among others. The team visited hotspots, sites of protests, including universities. They also visited hospitals, and they visited just key areas in different districts of Bangladesh. We also received more than 900 submissions from individuals.
In terms of expertise, we need traditional human rights experts and investigators who conduct interviews and look at the information received. This is coupled with digital forensics experts that analyze the digital imagery received, as you can see behind me, with a view to verifying the information received by the investigators, the human rights investigators. And here you will see imagery of some of the protests that occurred in July and August 2024, captured from various angles. So you see how we have zoomed in on certain key areas here. For example, we have a shooter and trying to triangulate and cross-check the information to see exactly what happened and to verify information that was received from witnesses, victims, and information providers.
Emergency services in the Argentinian capital, Buenos Aires, say more than 100 people have been evacuated from a luxury residential tower as a fire spread through several floors. 40 people were treated for smoke inhalation and several others were admitted to hospital before the blaze was controlled. The cause of the fire is not yet known. The 50-floor building is located in the exclusive neighborhood of Puerto Madero. A truck cabin that was swallowed by a sinkhole in Japan 2 weeks ago has been located in a nearby sewer pipe. Drone images suggest that a human body is inside the cabin, but it's unclear if it's that of the truck's missing 74-year-old driver. Authorities say the sinkhole, which now measures 40 meters in diameter, opened at a road intersection in Yashio City near Tokyo. It's believed to be caused by a sewer rupture. Search teams are unable to enter the 5 meters wide pipe due to continuous water flow and high levels of hydrogen sulfide or sewer gas. Saitama Governor Motohiro Ono said they will need to install a temporary bypass pipe to stop the water flow and get access to the truck. That process could take at least 3 months. Let's take you back to the United States as governance take center stage. Elon Musk and President Donald Trump. On Tuesday, both men were in the Oval Office, and Mr. Musk defended his cost-cutting plans as he also denied a hostile takeover of the U.S. government. While there, President Trump signed an order giving Mr. Musk's Department of Government agency, DOGE, more authority to cut the federal workforce. It instructed the heads of government agencies to comply with DOGE. The agency has been criticized by Democrats who have accused it of a lack of transparency, and its efforts have also hampered by legal challenges. DOGE has, for example, been blocked by a federal judge from accessing Treasury records in a case that seeks to enforce or ensure the agency does not interfere with funding signed off by Congress, which is outside its scope. But Mr. Musk, who was questioned by reporters for the first time since the inauguration last month, described sweeping government cuts as common sense measures that are not draconian or radical. Now let's bring in founding director, social work program at the University of Delaware, Professor Ohiro Onyesele. He joins us from Newark. A pleasure having you on the program today.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine, and good morning to you.
Right. So President Trump has been in office for a few weeks. Is there still apprehension about the change he's bringing to the United States?
Absolutely. There is actually significant apprehension, and the reasons are actually quite self-explanatory, because never in our history has there been a president who has come on to make such sweeping changes that really you can look behind the changes that are being made, and you can actually tell where the changes are going and why they're being made. But you can just also look at even the people who voted for him. Many of them are actually expressing some bias rumors. And why is that? It's because now they are going to the markets, and it's only been a few weeks, and the prices of groceries have gone up. The price of eggs, for example, has gone up nationally from $4.15 for a dozen or a dozen and a half eggs in December to now $4.95. The price of coffee is going up. The price of orange juice is going up. And I have just highlighted those because they are very basic things that Americans love. So the apprehension is growing even at that basic level. And if you go up across the various classes, you'll find that there's also apprehension growing because what we are seeing are changes that have really been contrary to what the Constitution says in many regards. And we can actually have more of this conversation because a country that prides itself on the Constitution and on institutions is really being shaken by decisions being made by one man who was elected and another who was not elected. So yes, people are apprehensive, and the apprehension is growing by the day. And even also you can look at how these policies are affecting our neighbors to the south and the north, Canada and Mexico, countries that we really need to work with us, and even countries across Latin America and Europe, and also being pulled out of world institutions that have kept us safe and have kept us in relations with one another. So that's why there's apprehension. I can go down a long list.
Yes, I certainly, I'm sure you can. And, you know, speaking of institutions and, you know, what's happening in the government now, he's signing executive orders and now giving more powers to the Department of Government Efficiency to slash the size and spending of the federal government. First of all, has that ever been a cause of concern for any American government? I mean, whatever is spent is for the American people.
Has that ever been a cause of concern? That's an excellent question because the simple answer is no. But it's been a source of political, it's been a political issue. It's been used as a political wedge between classes in this country. So it has always depended on whose ox is being got. So when we've talked about spending and when there has always been concern, the concern has always been spending that has to do with taking care of the poor, taking care of the vulnerable, and also foreign aid. So it becomes such a political thing, and people don't know that only 1% of our foreign expenditure actually goes to foreign aid. I will repeat that, 1%. So that when you hear that the USAID is being closed down by this one executive order, people are not thinking of the fact that USAID does so much good around the world that comes back to pay us. And if you look at presidents across the world, especially in Latin America, a bunch of the presidents are people who benefited from USAID scholarships. And because of USAID and because of the policy that George Bush actually created to help victims of AIDS, we have over 50 million people in Africa who are alive today who could have been dead from HIV/AIDS. And so when we are cutting those funds, slashing programs that affect the poor, the vulnerable, and countries around the world, people hear what's being told them and they're really riled up. But the reality is that when funding is going to the rich, and of course the rich are the people who benefit mostly from our expenditure in this country. And so even Elon Musk that we are talking about, there will be no Tesla without Elon Musk, without the government. Elon Musk's businesses will not exist. SpaceX will not exist without the government. So he's getting billions of dollars in aid from the government to really run his business. And so when you think of that, it comes down to one simple thing. It is never a concern when rich people are benefiting from government. But it's always a concern, a political concern, not concern among the American people, but among the politicians on one side of the aisle who are able to use that as a political wedge when we are talking about programs that affect the poor, the vulnerable, whether they are individuals or countries around the world. And the reality is that if you actually look at the slashes that are happening and who Elon Musk is cutting, I'll just give you a bunch of some very quick examples. He cut, well, the inspector generals of all institutions. Every institution in the United States has an inspector general. That's every department has an inspector general whose job is to examine waste and abuse and make sure that every department runs according to the way that it's supposed to run. When this president came into office, he fired all of them. And one of Elon Musk's first things to do when he came on was to fire a guy who actually was investigating SpaceX, his business. And so there is apprehension because of all of these facts, and also because Elon Musk brought into the Treasury Department people. First of all, he doesn't have, his Doge has not been established by Congress, and he's brought into this business of slashing costs and looking into all of our records, teenagers and people who have no security clearance. So people are concerned indeed.
And so what do you make of, this bromance between the president and the Dodge taskmaster, Elon Musk? There are whispers in some quarters that there could be a clash of interest between the two. Do they share similar roles, or what could be difficult to separate later on?
It could indeed be difficult to separate, and that's an excellent question, because there are so many people who believe that this bromance, is a really great word for it, will break up. And it seems to me that it actually very well will. At this point, Elon Musk is playing it right. If you watched him yesterday, he actually seems to be deferring to the president, which is what the president wants. If you can stroke him or you make him happy, then you're safe. But you will see that during the campaign, when the Democrats are referring to Elon Musk as, right after the campaign, they were referring to Elon Musk as the president-elect. The president-elect, the real president-elect, actually got angry. So when people begin to refer to him as President Musk, the president is going to get angry, because he's going to say, as he said before, Elon Musk cannot be president. He's not a president-elect because he wasn't born in this country. He has a thick skin. I think it really remains to be seen what will happen. There are some people who believe that it will not break up, because the president likes to hang out with people who are wealthy, and Elon Musk is the wealthiest man in the world. But it will break up if Elon Musk really begins to actually present himself, stay in the place of the president.
Right.
I am not so sure. I really can't tell what's going to happen with that, but I think that I can see it going both ways.
Right. And as for the other members of the Trump administration, there appears to be unlimited powers. The Secretary of Defense, for instance, renamed a fort after a so-called patriots, and there are intended changes to the judiciary system. This just appears to be, a clandestine attempt at governance by the administration. Could this be the leverage that other countries such as Nigeria need to balance relations with the United States?
That's an interesting question for multiple reasons. When I teach a policy class, I tell students, when I teach a class on organizational context, I also say this to students. If you want to understand the culture of an organization, you look at the leader. And very often, people who work in an organization tend to follow the culture, the leader, the actions of the leader. So why did January 6th happen here, for example? The president now did not have to say to the people, go and attack Capitol Hill. He didn't have to say that so clearly. He said, march to Capitol Hill and I'll be there with you. But even if he hadn't said that, they knew what he wanted. In the same way, members of this cabinet know exactly what the president wants. They know that he wants to cut respect and programs to people of color. and to poor people. He wants to cut foreign aid. He wants to deport people who are not white. And so they know all of that. So they are doing exactly what he wants. And that's the danger for countries like Nigeria when you consider it as, when you say, for example, it's a clandestine approach to governance. Yes, it is. But it's also a clandestine approach that is hiding in plain sight. If you look at what's happening, what he has just done with South Africa, saying white people in South Africa are being oppressed by the black people, therefore, he issued an executive privilege, an executive order on Friday to say white South Africans can come to the United States as refugees. At the same time that he's deporting people from the United States who he does not consider to be white. And so if you think of the fact that black South Africans, white people in South Africa only constitute 7% of the population, but sit on and control 70% of the land of the country, then you ask yourself, who's oppressing who? So the danger is this, that for countries like Nigeria, they could look at what's happening in the United States, and depending on the leadership of Nigeria, take that as a license to do to people and do to their country what is happening in the United States, which will not be a good thing. For the other side of it is that when, based on what is happening, Nigerian leaders can also take a very close look at it. And it could be an opportunity for them to approach the US government and say, well, we can step into the gaps that are being created by the relationships that are being affected in other parts of the country. But I will say to you, I can tell you that what the president is going to say, what his administration is going to say, is that if you want the United States to step in and become a closer partner with you, you have to terminate your relationship with China, or you have to strongly reduce your relationship with China. Then it becomes a choice for Nigeria. What will you do? It just means that Nigerian leaders need to be very strategic at this point and intentional in what they do.
Right. Interesting conversation we've had over the course of about 10 minutes or more. Thanks again, Professor Ohironi Esele, for your time on the program.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to be with you. Thank you.
Welcome back. We're in Africa now. The 38th African Union Summit holds in Addis Ababa at the end of this week, with expectations that the summit will focus on reparatory justice and racial healing. Heads of state and government will launch the AU's theme of the year for 2025, Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations, during the summit. Alongside the summit, the 46th Ordinary Session of the Executive Council will convene from the 12th through to the 13th of February, and the 49th Ordinary Session of the Permanent Representatives Committee will convene from February 14 to 31. Well, Channel Television's Lanre Lasisi is in Addis Ababa for the AU Summit. He joins us now for updates. Lanre, great to speak with you. The AU leaders begin arriving tonight in Addis Ababa, and there are already expectations riding on the summit. One of the issues being the status of the 3 Francophone countries that recently pulled out of ECOWAS and the recent security crisis in the DRC. Is there any inkling as to the direction of talks in addition to these?
Yes, we are in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and everything is getting set for the AU summit. I can tell you that right from the airport, a lot of people are arriving for this all-important summit. And I agree with you, as you said, the issue of security is key, because one of the issues that have been lined up to be addressed at the summit is peace and unity. And so the issue of the 3 Sahel states that took a step out of ECOWAS will be considered. The situation in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is sure to come up. And I'm sure as leaders and all those that will be gathered for this event look at how to move the continent forward, that issue will obviously come up and will be discussed.
Well, many political and economic blocs are resolving response to possible U.S. policies under President Donald Trump. Will that be up for discussion at the summit?
Well, I'm sure as the leaders gather, there is no doubt that will be part of what they will be discussing. As I'm sure you're aware, part of the major points they want to discuss here has to do with the development of the continent, the economic development of the continent. And they will also, part of what they have planned out is to discuss intra-Africa, intercontinent, inter-country relationship, all in a bid to promote trade, to promote economic development. And as they discuss this amongst themselves, I'm clear it will also affect how to respond to some of the economic will I call it sanctions or the positioning that is being taken, especially by the United States of America. The continent will obviously have to know how to prepare. The countries will have to discuss, and I'm sure as a body, they will also want to see how to respond to that. So while it's not clearly stated among some of the things that have been listed, some of the themes that have been outlined will obviously mean that that issue will be considered.
And I suppose President Bola Tinubu will be arriving any minute now to attend the summit. Also, to attend the summit, have there been whispers about what his address the summit could pertain?
There has been no whispers in that line, but yes, at least we have an inkling of what some of his addresses or what the address will be at this summit. Last week, when the president left the country, his special advisor, Sunday Dari, had given us a hint that the president asked the chairman of ECOWAS, which is a very key economic bloc on the continent, will be like addressing the summit and giving them a rundown of development, especially that issue we mentioned before, the withdrawal or resignation of the 3 Sahel states. That's one issue we're told. He will be briefing the summit and giving them developments, some of the things that have been going on, some of the steps that have been taken. And obviously it will be as a sort of, something for the other leaders to look at as continent and even the world continues to adjust and adapt to changing times and agitations within countries and regions. But we're sure President will also go forward to see some of the developments he has taken and he's doing in his country, how he's responding to issues of economic change, his reforms, how he's also handling climate change issues. And I'm sure he will use that opportunity to also talk about his own campaign, about how Africa needs to open up to work with themselves, even as they try to work together as countries in the South with and together with the world economy. So these are some of the things that we have a feeling the president will be discussing, touching when he addresses the summit. But obviously, we'll wait till we see the letters here brought to the summit.
Well, February 11 has been commemorated in the United Nations as a Day of Women and Girls in Science, and saw a first historic gathering of women astronauts at an event raising awareness for gender-based violence in STEAM. Soon to be the first Vietnamese woman to go to space, activist and astronaut Amanda Nguyen shared her story as a survivor of sexual assault and reiterating that gender-based violence continues to be a barrier for women in STEM. She said a 2018 National Academics of Science report found that over half of women, faculty, staff and students have experienced sexual harassment. Other speakers at the event include Head of Communications at the UN Spotlight Initiative, Koyi Adeboye, and astronaut Jeanette Epps.
Gender-based violence continues to be a barrier for women in STEM. A 2018 National Academies of Science report found that over half of women faculty, staff, and students have experienced sexual harassment. The future of innovation depends on breaking these barriers. And the truth is, for the estimated 35% of women on Earth who are survivors of sexual violence, access to justice is a necessary prerequisite to true peace.
Today's event is a timely reminder that despite the increasing global pushback and a reversion to regressive policies on gender equality, progress for women and girls is here to stay. Let us all join hands to ensure that every woman and girl has the opportunity to achieve her dreams, here on this earth, or in space, or in anywhere in our universe.
To the generation of women currently in the sciences, I say to you that we have a personal mandate to create opportunities for access to education, to mentorship, and to provide the encouragement necessary for these young women to launch their dreams.
We have J for justice, to ignite the bold. We have E for equity, to cut past the old. We have D for diversity, to end the fight. We have I for inclusion, to try to make it right. A Jedi space to rally behind, a universal force so big it binds. Inspiration to change the world. A new beginning for us to hold. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about space to inspire for all of humanity.
So today we celebrate the women working in science, technology, engineering, and math, providing scientific curiosity, technical expertise, and especially passion. You all will make the world better for all humankind. You are leading us. And thank you. Thank you, astronauts. Working together we can, and we shall, dare I say it, change the world.
Indeed, we shall. Thank you so much for watching The World Today. That's the program. I'm Rebecca Rogers.